Zawadi wiped the sweat from her brow, the fabric sticking to her arms as she worked through the final rows of stitching. The factory was almost silent now, only the faint buzz of a single overhead light and the low clank of the last working machine echoed in the emptiness. Everyone else had gone home. But Zawadi stayed. She had to. The batch had to be done by morning, and she knew if it wasn't, it would be docked from her already meager wages. "Still here?" came a voice from behind. She turned quickly. It was Jabari Okoth, the factory owner. He was young for a man in his position, only 30, but carried himself like royalty. Tonight, his shirt sleeves were rolled, and the top buttons were open. Zawadi straightened. "Yes, sir. I didn't want to leave it unfinished." He stepped into the light, watching her hands move swiftly, expertly. "You work harder than anyone I've seen here." "Thank you, sir. You must be exhausted. Come upstairs, there's some tea," he offered, his voice oddly kind. Zawadi hesitated. He noticed. "You deserve a break, Zawadi. I insist." Upstairs, the office lounge smelled of leather and wood polish. There was a small bed in one corner, often used for long night shifts. He poured her a cup of tea from the thermos on the side table. She accepted it with both hands. "Thank you." He sat across from her. His eyes lingered on her face, her cracked lips, the tiredness in her gaze. "You've never asked for anything," he said softly. "I only want to earn what's fair," she replied. Jabari's eyes darkened slightly. "You're different. You're not loud like the others. You're quiet like someone who's been carrying the world on her back." Zawadi looked down, unsure of what to say. He stood up and walked over to her. She flinched slightly, but didn't move. "You don't have to be strong all the time," he whispered, brushing a lock of hair from her forehead. "Sir," she began, confused, frightened, unsure. He took the tea from her hand and placed it on the table. Then he gently held her chin. "You're beautiful when you're tired," he murmured. She tried to step back, but he caught her hand, not forcefully, but firm. "Just stay. Just tonight." His voice was velvet, and her heart beat wildly, not out of desire, but panic and paralysis. Her lips parted to the object, but the words dissolved. "You'll be safe here. I promise," he said. Somewhere between his touch, the exhaustion in her bones, the weight of life, and the illusion of care, Zawadi stopped resisting. That night, on the bed where invoices were once sorted, a thread of her dignity was pulled away, wrapped in a silence that left no bruises, only scars unseen. The sun had not yet risen when Zawadi walked home. Her body ached. Her heart was quiet, not peaceful, but stunned. The street dogs barked in the alleyways, and the scent of damp earth filled the early morning air. Her clothes still held the scent of Jabari's cologne. She hated it. When she reached the rusty iron door of her home, something in the silence didn't feel right. Normally, her father would be coughing softly, trying to sit up, or calling her name with his weak voice. She stepped inside. Baraka." "Baba?" she called. No answer. She dropped the bag of leftover bread on the table and moved to the mat where her father always lay. The blanket was still over him. She knelt beside him. Her hand touched his. Cold. "Baba?" She shook him. "Nothing. Baba. Please." His eyes were half open, lips parted slightly, but no breath came. She screamed. The kind of scream that doesn't echo outside, it dies in the chest. Neighbors came running. A woman hugged her from behind as she wept over her father's still body, rocking back and forth like a child. There was no money for a burial. The neighbors gathered coins. A man offered his wheelbarrow. The imam agreed to pray without payment. He was buried before the afternoon call to prayer. Zawadi stood alone at the grave, her hands covered in dirt, tears streaking down her cheeks. She didn't pray. She couldn't. She just stared. First her mother. Now him. The only people who ever loved her, gone. In the weeks that followed, Zawadi moved like a ghost. She returned to the factory once, but she couldn't look Jabari in the eyes. He didn't speak to her again. Just passed by like nothing had happened. Her appetite vanished. Her back hurt. Then came the nausea. She thought it was grief. But when her stomach began to swell, she knew. She sat in a small clinic in a slum alleyway, waiting. The nurse confirmed it in a tone that was almost casual. "You're 2 months pregnant, girl." The world spun. That night, she stood outside Jabari's private office. She had dressed neatly. Fixed her scarf. Rehearsed her words. When he looked up and saw her, his smile faded quickly. "I need to talk to you," she said. He nodded. "Come in." Inside, she stood straight, trying not to tremble. "I'm pregnant," she said quietly. Jabari blinked. What? It's yours. That night, after the shipment, I didn't lie. He stood up and turned his back. Zawadi, you don't understand how this looks. You're my employee. You can't just come in here with claims. Her throat burned. I'm not asking for marriage. Just help. Anything. He sighed. Zawadi. It was a mistake. A moment. Please, don't make it worse. She felt something crack inside her chest. You were kind that night, she said bitterly. Now I see that was the trap. He didn't reply. She walked out of the room, her shoulders shaking, but not from tears. From rage. Back in her rented room, the landlord knocked 2 days later. 3 weeks overdue. You either pay, or leave by tomorrow. Zawadi didn't argue. She just packed the few clothes she had, wrapped them in a sheet, and walked away from the only home she had left. In her belly, 2 lives fluttered silently, unaware of the storm around them. Zawadi wandered the streets of Madari, her belongings tied in a faded Kaitanj bundle. Her stomach was starting to show, 2 lives growing inside her, but her eyes were sunken, her face pale with hunger and exhaustion. The sidewalks were packed with vendors shouting prices, the smell of roasted maize and smoke in the air. Children ran barefoot, laughing. She walked through them like a ghost. That night, she slept beneath the veranda of a closed pharmacy, her bag beneath her head and her hand over her stomach. She had no words left for prayer, only silence. The next morning, she fainted outside a church gate. A woman found her. Tall, kind-eyed, wrapped in a plain white headscarf. Child, she said gently, touching Zawadi's cheek. You need a safe place. Her name was Mama Thandiwe, and she ran a small women's shelter beside the church. A dozen women and children lived there, most with wounds the world couldn't see. No one asked questions. Zawadi was given a mattress in the corner, a hot meal, and a warm cup of porridge. For the first time in weeks, she cried herself to sleep in safety. The next morning, Mama Thandiwe handed her a list. These homes need washing done. You're strong. You can carry your babies and still work. Zawadi nodded. I'll do anything. And she did. She scrubbed floors in rich homes. Washed clothes until her fingers blistered. Carried water in yellow jerry cans uphill. Sometimes she vomited from the pregnancy, sometimes she bled lightly and feared the worst, but she never stopped. On the 4th week, she passed out in a kitchen. The homeowner, a kind widow named Mama Achiang, rushed her to a nearby clinic. It's twins, the nurse said after checking the scan. They're small, but strong. Zawadi smiled weakly, whispering into the clinic air, Amani and Zuri. The nurse didn't ask what the names meant. But Zawadi knew. Peace and beauty. The only gifts she still believed in. Nights at the shelter were noisy with coughing children and women crying in sleep. But Zawadi didn't mind. She stitched clothes for neighbors by candlelight and set aside every coin she earned in a torn envelope hidden beneath her mattress. Mama Thandiwe gave her extra porridge. I've seen women break under less, she said one day. But not you, Zawadi. Zawadi smiled. I break all the time. I just don't stay broken. Sometimes, when she walked past the factory gates to take a shortcut, she'd see Jabari's car, shining, black, untouched by the dust of the world. But she never turned her head. Let him live in clean offices and forget. She would live in truth, and remember. The rains came early that season. The sky over Madari turned gray for weeks. Streets turned to muddy rivers. Cold wind crept through tin roofs like ghost fingers. At the shelter, food was harder to find. But Zawadi's belly had become a world of its own, round and heavy with life. She walked slower now. Her back ached with every breath. Her fingers swelled. But she never stopped working. Every coin she earned from washing clothes or stitching torn uniforms was tucked away. Every night she whispered to her unborn children, "You're coming into a hard world, my little ones. But you're not coming into it unloved." Then one night, it began. A deep pain wrapped around her spine and gripped her belly like a fist. She fell to her knees beside the laundry line behind the shelter. Mama Thandiwe, she cried out, her voice tight with pain. Women rushed out with shawls and cloth. One ran to fetch the church van. The contractions came fast, one after another, like waves crashing over her ribs. Stay with me, Zawadi. Breathe, Mama Thandiwe said, gripping her hand as they drove through the muddy alleys. At the government clinic, the nurses were overwhelmed, but they didn't turn her away. They laid her on a thin mattress with no sheets. The walls were peeling, the light flickering. But Zawadi didn't see any of it. She was somewhere between screaming and praying. Tears rolled down her cheeks, not from pain, but from the weight of it all. Her father's face. The factory. The cold floor. Jabari's voice. The hunger. The rejections. The ache of being forgotten. And through it all, the small kicks inside her. The first cry echoed at 3:41 a.m. Then another at 3:44. Two tiny voices broke into the world like music through silence. Zawadi turned her head weakly as the nurse placed both babies on her chest. They were small, so small, but alive. Warm. Real. A girl with eyes wide open. And another who clung to her mother's finger like she had been waiting for this her whole life. Zawadi wept. Tears soaked her cheeks as she kissed their soft foreheads. Amani, she whispered. You are peace in my storm. Then the other. Zuri. You are beauty in my ashes. Back at the shelter, the women decorated her mattress with scraps of bright cloth. They boiled maize and beans. Mama Thandiwe lit a candle and prayed over the girls. Zawadi watched them sleep, bundled in second-hand baby shawls. She had nothing. No crib. No father for her children. No salary. No title. But she had love. And she had fire in her blood. That night, she lay awake between the twins, their chests rising and falling like tiny waves. I will raise you with everything I am, she whispered. Even if it kills me. Mornings came early now. Before the sun even rose over the crowded rooftops of Madari, Zawadi was awake, rocking one baby in her arms while breastfeeding the other. She learned to move with them balanced across her hips, tied in a sling made from an old headscarf. She had no choice. By the end of the second month, she returned to work, washing clothes, sweeping yards, scrubbing floors while Amani and Zuri slept in a basket beside her, wrapped in towels and dreams. Sometimes, she carried them both on her back to the river, tied tightly while she bent over to rinse clothes for women in the wealthier neighborhoods. The people she worked for sometimes gave her food, sometimes leftovers, sometimes just silence. But Zawadi never begged. One day, after delivering some washed clothes to a tailor, she noticed a small torn pile of fabric lying on the floor. She bent to pick it up. Leave that, the tailor said. Useless scraps. She looked at them, bright patterns, strong cotton, thrown away like they meant nothing. Can I take them? She asked. The tailor shrugged. If you want. That night, Zawadi sat under the weak light at the shelter and stitched together small baby bonnets using those scraps. Then socks. Then little dresses. Other mothers at the shelter watched in awe. You did this with your hands? One asked. Yes, Zawadi said simply. The next day, a church volunteer saw the dresses and asked if she could buy one. Buy. The word rang like a bell in Zawadi's chest. That night, she didn't sleep. In the weeks that followed, Zawadi began collecting more scraps from local tailors. She washed them, ironed them with an old iron heated on coals, and began creating more baby clothes. She used the sewing needle she had guarded since her own factory days. Mama Thandiwe gave her a corner in the church compound on Sundays. Soon, people came not just to pray, but to ask, "Where's the girl who makes baby dresses?" They didn't know her name. But they knew her hands. By the time Amani and Zuri were 8 months old, Zawadi had saved enough to rent a single-room shack near the shelter. It wasn't much, just a metal roof, one small window, and a thin mattress on the ground. But it was hers. Every morning, she fed her daughters mashed bananas. Every night, she stitched until her fingers ached. She began teaching other women to sew, too. They helped her. Shared thread. Shared pain. Shared joy. Zawadi had no business sign. No website. No husband. No help from Jabari. But people began to call her Mama Vazi, the mother of clothing. And her babies? They began to crawl. They smiled often. Laughed like bells. But even as life stitched itself together again, there were moments when she walked past the factory gates, or saw a black car that looked too familiar. Moments when she stopped, hand instinctively going to her daughters' heads, pulling them close. The past hadn't let go. It never fully would. But for now, she was building a new one, with needle, thread, and the strength of a mother who had nothing, but gave everything. Years passed like wind across a dry field. Zawadi, now 23, had become a name in her community, not for wealth or fame, but for resilience. Her small baby clothing business had grown. She had trained 6 other women, all single mothers. She called it Nguo Yatumaini, Clothes of Hope. Amani and Zuri, now nearly 4, ran through the alleys with dusty feet and endless laughter. They were healthy, bright-eyed, and beautiful. Zawadi had built a home out of broken bricks and quiet prayers. But somewhere else in the city, Jabari Okoth sat in his glass office, surrounded by success, and haunted by silence. He often opened a drawer where a simple scarf was folded, the same one Zawadi wore that night. He never forgot her face the day she told him about the pregnancy. The fear. The courage. The way he turned his back. He had tried to forget. Buried himself in expansion projects, new factories, expensive suits. But peace never came. He had women. Friends. Business partners. But at night, in the mirror, all he saw was a man who left someone drowning to protect his own image. One Sunday, Jabari was invited to speak at a youth seminar at a community church. He didn't know until he arrived that it was held in Matari. As he walked through the narrow alleys, he saw posters stapled to a tree. Greater than "Come visit Nguya Tumaini," custom-made baby clothes by local mothers. A name below caught his eye. Founder, Zawadi Baraka. His breath caught in his throat. She was here. After the seminar, he walked toward the small open space where stalls were set up. And there, beneath the cloth canopy, was Zawadi. Her hands were helping a child try on a bright kite-inch dress. Two girls sat nearby, coloring on scrap cardboard. One of them laughed in a way that sent a strange ache through Jabari's chest. She looked just like him. He stood frozen. Zawadi looked up, and saw him. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she rose and walked toward him. She was still slender, still graceful. But stronger now. Her face held years in it, pain, growth, and something that surprised him. "Peace, Zawadi," he said, his voice barely a whisper. She nodded. "Mr. Okoth." He opened his mouth, but no words came. She saved him from the struggle. "You don't have to explain," she said softly. "I already forgave you." Tears stung his eyes. "I was afraid. Weak. Selfish," he whispered. "I've regretted that night. Every day." Zawadi looked back at her daughters. "They didn't need your name. Or your money. They just needed me. And I became enough." He swallowed, ashamed, then said what he had never said to anyone. "I'm sorry. I was wrong. I can never undo it. But if there's any way, anything I can do to support them." She raised a hand gently. "They are not a burden. They are my joy. And they are not your punishment. They are my reward." He looked at her like one might look at a mountain, humbled. "I'm proud of you," he said, voice cracking. She nodded. "You should be. I didn't disappear. I blossomed." Later, as he turned to leave, Amani ran up to her mother. "Who was that man?" she asked. Zawadi knelt beside her and smiled. "Just someone from long ago," she said. "Someone who reminded me how strong I've become." Months later, Jabari donated anonymously to fund a community training center for young mothers, under Zawadi's leadership. He never asked for credit. He never asked to be part of their lives. But sometimes, from a distance, he would watch the girls skipping rope or selling hand-stitched doll dresses at a church fair. And in that silent space between regret and redemption, he finally found peace. Zawadi's story was not one of revenge, but of rising. She was not a victim. She was a builder, a mother, a warrior with needle and thread. In a world that tried to break